All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're excited to go over 8 steps to better buildings with data. Just a quick look at the agenda. We have Tim Porter from Urjanet and Ralf VonSosen, who is the VP of Marketing at Lucid, joining us today. They're going to take a quick look at why building intelligence is important and how you can harness your data in 8 steps, and then we'll review questions. So throughout this, it's very much a dialogue, and so we would like for you to put any questions in the chat, and we can address them throughout the presentation. We'll also go over additional questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ralf.
Hey, thank you, Hannah, very much. I appreciate it. My role is VP of Marketing and Products here at Lucid. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. Really excited to sort of see the development in the industry in terms of really what I would call the democratization of data and the ability for more and more companies and individuals to harness that data, and love kind of seeing how it's changed and shaped different companies and individuals. I'd like to hand it off to my friend Tim Porter for a quick introduction. Tim?
Thanks, Ralf. This is Tim Porter. I am the Director of Alliances here at Urjanet, and I'm responsible for a partnership organization. So we work with all the folks that use our data on behalf of their customers, and we're very happy to be a part of this discussion. We're very proud of our partnership with Lucid and seeing the explosive growth that they've seen over the last several years, and that is something we're really, really happy to be playing a role in and participating in.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that very much. And I think what I wanted to start with was really talking about, why this is important. And I think, sort of to exemplify a little bit is, if we think about the state of the art in the Internet of Things, or in driving, or in technology that we encounter on a day-to-day basis these days, here sort of the inside of a Tesla probably is a little bit of the kind of the highlight of how in control and how much data is flowing and the kind of information you can get. Unfortunately, what is so pervasive throughout all our personal lives isn't necessarily as pervasive in some of our professional lives. And this is actually a photo that one of my colleagues took recently while visiting one of our customers. And unfortunately, a lot of the data, when we think about buildings and energy and electricity, is still a very antiquated in terms of how we're collecting it. And we're just not collecting it in the kind of fidelity and the kind of detail that we could and should. I think what was once about the movement of paper bills is now really the movement of real-time data. And with that, I think, comes fantastic opportunities for individuals. People that take advantage of that, I think, will have that opportunities in what I would consider kind of 4 critical areas. And on the flip side, I think there also is tremendous risk in being left behind in these 4 critical areas if you don't embrace the data and the insights that are available. Those 4 areas are costs, compliance, occupant satisfaction, and equity value. And really quickly thinking about costs, I think many of us heard the statistics about 30% of energy consumed by U.S. commercial buildings is wasted energy. The question is which 30%, right? That's always the tough one to figure out. What 30% is it that you want to attack? But there's definitely opportunities to control costs. Secondly is managing compliance risk. In a recent, over 70% of facilities and operations managers rank compliance as a high priority, and 60% of those say they spend at least 5 hours a week on it. Doing some type of work, collecting information, reporting information around this area. The third is around delighting occupants, and some of you may be familiar with the sort of the JLL study and sort of this rule of thumb of the 330-300, and that's for every square foot of property, you spend $3 on utilities, $30 on rent, and $300 on payroll. Those are representative figures, but I think the important point is that if you think about occupant satisfaction, you think the productivity of occupants, either it's your facilities, your buildings, and you want to make sure you're getting the most productivity out of the occupants, out of the people that are there, or if you're leasing this facility to somebody, you want to make sure that they are in a position where they can do that, because that will just increase their satisfaction and their rent and so forth. So delighting occupants is number 3, and then number 4, actually right on the heels of that, is growing equity value. And that is all about a Morgan Stanley study that was done, where if putting in some sustainability retrofits and getting better information on their buildings, they were able to see a 3% increase in occupancy rates and rent premiums, which also then combined with the retrofits added up to a 10% increase in property value. So what we're seeing is that embracing this data can have some really critical impacts, and hopefully if you need to make this business case for making some investments or adding more resources to these efforts, here's some information that can help you do just that. So with that in the back of our minds, I think and now we want to take a look at, well, how do you get started here? How do you kind of get on this path to becoming more data-driven and being able to kind of take advantage, centralizing this information, discovering new insights, and improving your performance from there? So that was at the heart of the ebook that we recently published together with Urjanet, and we want to kind of go through some of the 8 steps that we see from there. So first, I want to hand it off to my colleague Tim to talk a little bit about goal number 1.
You know, kind of as with anything in life, it's really important to know where you want to go before you start going there. And you know, we set goals for our careers, we set goals for our personal life, and really setting out to manage your buildings is no different. You know, it's an experience that we've got to make sure we're clear on where we're headed. And so far what we've seen in the organizations that we've worked with, those that are most successful are clearly the ones that have started by setting out specifically what they want to achieve, as opposed to kind of throwing darts or gathering a bunch of data and finding out what it is that they see. They really start by defining what it is that they're after, what are the goals they're wanting to try to achieve. Sometimes those are primarily financial, saving money on energy spend, simply helping with your bottom line. Other times they're more environmentally focused, you know, making your buildings more sustainable, or making your sustainability report that you have as a part of your annual report something that is interesting and acceptable and exciting to your shareholders. Or it could be a very specific goal, such as getting for a particular building some LEED certification level that makes your building more attractive to tenants, both new tenants and to existing tenants. So setting these goals is really important, because that really defines what it is that you need to try to gather from a data perspective, and it will focus the team that you've got so that they can really be effective with the time that they're putting in to the project. A key component in setting these goals is that it's in areas that are measurable. You know, each goal will require a different set of information in order to be achieved, and you know, that could vary from water usage to electricity demand patterns. Maybe for financial goals, you're looking mostly at utility costs or the rate structures that you have across buildings. But you need to start by defining what your goals are. And once you've done that, that kind of sets the framework, or at least the launching point for the rest of the steps that will really help you achieve some success in improving how you're managing your buildings.
I think, Tim, what's an interesting point there is sometimes these goals are really set externally, and sometimes they're set internally. I know some of the companies I've had the opportunity to work with, for example, NASA and Lawrence Berkeley Labs, those are two that are very tied to government contracts, federal contracts, and they have a mandate for a 2.5% reduction year over year over the next 10 years. Another example of that is City University of New York, where they had some very specific parameters put on them in terms of a 22% reduction by 2020, all based on New York City codes. Versus then we have other customers who are looking for much more sort of the social responsibility aspect, you know, universities like a Stanford University, and then other customers like Avery Dennison that we worked with, who was very focused on actually, you know, not that they didn't feel the social responsibility or the other pieces to it, but they tied it much more to their overall production, and in their production facilities started setting their goals were around being the most effective and the most efficient in running their production lines and their fabrication units. And that was their goal. And it was interesting, sort of like what you were saying, right? Each one of those companies then took a pretty different approach to how they set up those projects and the initiatives that they ended up prioritizing.
Right, and I think as you go through those types of projects and you've set maybe an initial set of goals, that you go through a project and you fine-tune your methods and get data access implementations completed, and you've kind of seen some success or some failures with your first effort, you iterate those, and the goals that you set can be different every year or every couple of years. But the important thing is to kind of start with a set of them, because that's really what's going to help you put in place a framework that will let you accomplish those goals. And likely, once you've done that, you're going to find yourself with a set of data, a set of information and tools that will allow you to accomplish a lot of other goals, maybe that you hadn't really thought were even things you might achieve. So yeah, it all does sort of start getting off the ground with a good, clear set of goals.
Well, I guess that kind of carries us right into number two then, which is once you've got those goals, defining the kind of insights and data that you actually need to be able to understand, right?
Yeah. The goals really do set the specific data sets in place that you need to focus on gathering to be able to accomplish those goals. Some data needs to help you kind of look in the rearview mirror and see how things look historically. Other data needs to give you more of a kind of a clean windshield to the road that you're driving right now. And that's kind of, you know, stuff that's fresh, stuff that's happening today, stuff that's happening this month. And other data gives you more of a map that helps you see the rest of the world around you, maybe some of your peers and how they're performing, and if maybe they're accomplishing some things that you feel like with a similar building or a similar portfolio you ought to be able to achieve as well, or just compare yourself to see how you're doing amongst peers. And so, you know, all those different data sets really do help you drive a bunch of effective goal achievements. And these three, to say if you're going to kind of create those as three types of sets or bucket them into sets, you know, it's really historical data giving that past view, current and real-time data giving you what things look like now, sometimes now as in the last 15 minutes, and peer data that gets you information that you can see across the industry, across your peer group. And if you can get all of that information, if that complete set of data into a single system, then you really do have an opportunity to make some really meaningful impact for how it is that you're managing your buildings. You know, financial-based goals are going to clearly require information on the supply side of things. Energy management, consumption reduction types of goals are going to obviously need information on the demand side. But having a framework with these goals in place that you're trying to accomplish will make it pretty obvious what data you're
Other piece to start looking at, right, is, well, what kind of data do I need? Do I need data for different types of buildings? How do I start classifying this data into, I need data for certain production facilities, going back to the Avery Dennison example, for example, right, when we were working with them. they had certain needs and were defining certain goals and insights depending on what they needed for their fabrication units. And then they had different goals and were looking at different data based on their office buildings, for example, right? So it's kind of adapting and almost like a little kind of a matrix that you start putting together in terms of defining the kind of data that you need to be able to get you to the place that you want to get to.
Right, right.
So moving on to number 3 then, if you have sort of then it starts becoming about an inventory of data sources, because now you have your wish list, right? And now it's a matter of, well, how close are you to your wish list, and you actually have the data that you need, and doing that inventory of the data sources.
Yeah, now you know what you're trying to achieve, you know the data you're going to need to achieve those goals, and the third step really is all about setting out the inventory of what data sources are available to you to satisfy those data needs. And I think it's important to point out in particular that these first 3 steps kind of can be iterative, and it may be that you go through these a couple of times. You might need to go back and modify your goals if you determine that the data that you're requiring to achieve those goals is just going to be too difficult to obtain. If for instance, someone decides to see what the impact of the lunar cycle is on your building's performance, and you're going to need temperature readings on the moon, that's going to be probably a hard data set to get a hold of. So that's probably an overly simplified, maybe not so intelligent example. But you go through this and iterate it based on what the data sources are that you have in your inventory. And there's a lot of sources of data that you can use. You can get data from IoT devices. You can get data from sensors off of equipment. You can get data from smart meters that you've deployed at your buildings. You can even get data from smart meters that the utility has deployed as the main meter at your location, and give you some granular information. You can get data from internal reports or utility invoices. What we've specialized here at Urjanet on is the fact that we realized there was a lot of data that you can gather without much physical effort from the people on site, and that's really important to be able to have data sources that are easy to obtain, or at least obtainable without requiring tons and tons of people to put in a lot of effort. Utilities put a gigantic amount of detailed data on their utility bills, for example. They include cost information, obviously, but also usage details, demand elements, all the different complicated rate structures that your buildings are under from a tariff perspective, time of use and seasonal consumption details. All these things show up on invoices. Sometimes they also provide the 15-minute interval data for you if they have installed a smart meter themselves that they can make available for you. So, that's the good news, that these, both these invoices and meter data information can be available from the utility if you have intelligent ways to gather them. And often, most of the time, that data is available historically. So that will give you information both for that kind of rear view data set, the rear view mirror data set historically, but also the real-time or current usage information as that data becomes available as you're using it from the utility company. So I think we've seen on average about 12 months worth of history typically available with each utility provider. So they really are very good sets of data. It's entirely possible that the utility company by themselves already has a major set of the data source that you need for your building to get most of what you're after in your goal setting. So that's the good news. The bad news is that there are thousands of different utility companies. So even though they've got great sources of data, maybe everything that you need, they all make it available in different ways, and they all make it available to different, via different avenues. So it's it's a pretty complex set of data to gather because there's so many utility companies that we have here in North America. So that's kind of what makes the next step, the fourth step, a critical one. Now you've inventoried what data sources are available. Do you have a way of actually gathering the data that you're going to need?
Well, I think it's one of the things that I've seen with a customer like Stanford is that you have a campus that has not just different types of buildings, but buildings of very different ages, that are very different uses, right? I mean, compare a science building to a dormitory to an athletic facility. And it's not just that you want to capture different data for these, but you only have the ability to capture a certain type of data for these different facilities. And it's important in sort of figuring out what information do you need from these different facilities, and also make the decision then where do you want to invest more resources to get better data and more information. And I think that's always sort of an interesting decision that we need to make when we're trying to put a overarching strategy together for a portfolio, and we're looking at the data that we have, and potentially for some initiatives, like we're trying to do some peak demand management, maybe some of the data isn't available. What have you seen in terms of companies that have been successful in being able to get over that hump, where they kind of have an initiative, but then they figure out, well, oh, we just don't have the kind of incremental data or the kind of data that we need to take on this initiative?
Yeah, that's a great kind of checkpoint that you run into when you're in this step of the process, figuring out, well, how is it that I'm going to get this information? And a lot of it has to do with understanding what the data is that's available, and often people are surprised at how much data they can get actually just from the bills that they've been paying. They might not have even seen the bills because they're going straight to AP and getting paid, but on those bills you're generally going to find information about peak usage and what your usage was within each different rate component structure. So if you've got an on-off and mid type of rate structure, the bill will tell you often what your usage was within each of those ranges, in addition to what it is that you're paying for those. And if you have some kind of demand-based charges, where if you've exceeded some threshold of consumption in any given month, you get charged separately for that. Those are indicated on the invoice, and often those are kind of on page 4 of an invoice or page 5, and they're buried in the details, which if you're using manual methods to get that data, might not be something that you pay attention to, and certainly not something you're going to be very interested in going back historically to get lots and lots of months worth of that information across lots and lots of buildings. So there, you know, part of this inventorying of the data sources is not just where is the data that I can use, but what all is the completeness of that data. What does the data actually provide me? And you might find out that there's some, you can go back and revise your goals in a positive way and say, holy smokes, I had no idea that I could find out, you know, all of the locations that have some kind of nuclear recovery charge on them. And you might want to make some changes based on information that you didn't know you could get to.
Yeah, and I think the part of that is, right, being able to centralize that data in one place and look at it in a consistent manner as well. You know, it's been interesting working with some customers who obviously, you know, Excel is a popular tool in doing some of that, but working with customers trying to get away from doing that. And McKesson actually was an interesting example that we've worked with, where they definitely had that challenge, where they have over 1,200 facilities in different locations around the world. And their initiative started by saying, okay, we're going to take these, you know, they actually started with 200 facilities that they sort of selected, and they actually put a mandate together that said, for every facility, we have to have a way of gathering this data into a common framework and into a common platform. So any system that's being put in place, any data that's being gathered is now is able to be centralized into one common place, and that has, you know, made a huge impact on their business and their ability to have visibility over their portfolio of buildings.
Yeah. There's gigantic value once you can get all that breadth of data in a single place and have some tools that allow you to actually visualize that and see it in a way that really makes it meaningful.
Yeah, and that's, I think, is all about then taking that and transforming it into actionable insights, right? It's great that we're talking about gathering all this data, and if a little personal tidbit here, I have the pleasure of having a brother that's a year and a half older than me that has a PhD in applied mathematics from Caltech. So, I sort of always thought that I couldn't visualize data and get insights out of data as well as he could, and I don't think I ever will be. But I think it's sort of made me very sensitive to, I guess, how do you take this data and how do you actually create action out of it? How do you make sense out of all this information that's coming across? And I think this goes a little bit back to step one, where we're talking about setting goals, because when we set those goals, we know who the audience is as well, right? And we know, do we need to present this information to, is the goal to sell it to finance in terms of projects that we have and that we want to get approved? Is it in terms of trying to drive costs down, so finding patterns and finding exceptions that will help us do that? Or is it that we want to be able to show for sustainability reasons, be able to report and show information about how we're doing better in negating greenhouse gas emissions or something like that? So I think it's really important that you keep that in mind to be able to say, okay, where in this data do I want to find patterns? Where do I want to look? Because I think it's really easy to get caught up in just slicing and dicing data different ways that at the end of the day give you insights and give you information, but aren't necessarily actionable. You can't really necessarily do something with them, which makes them very interesting tidbits, but doesn't necessarily get you to a place where you can actually change your activities and change your actions.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Ralf. I mean, there is going to be so much visibility that you'll be given if you can get this complete set of data into a single system with some of the visualization capabilities that Building OS provides, and gives you tools to slice and dice and rotate the cubes in a bunch of different ways. You're gonna see so much that you'd never seen before, that it probably could be a tiny bit like Christmas morning, where you don't know which toy to play with first. And so having some real understanding of what the really materially impactful insights are versus the ones that are just really, really incredibly interesting is going to go back to the setting of the goals again, right? If you're setting goals to really reduce costs, and you can get visibility into where it is that spending's happening during certain periods of the day in certain regions of the country, then you know that that's a path you want to keep going down from a visualization standpoint to get some pictures into some actions you can take there, as opposed to just things that are really, really fascinating, though maybe just anecdotal, as you're talking with your portfolio managers.
Yeah, and I think once we have that, right, we can now transform those insights into action, and that's, I think, a very rewarding place for many individuals. I've had some really interesting conversations through the experience we've had with Jacob Kane, who's kind of the VP of Operations now at Weber State University. And when we started working with him a few years ago, it was all about doing what we've been doing, what we've been talking about so far, getting that information. But what that then allowed him to do was, this was back when he was really he was the energy manager, but getting that insight all of a sudden freed him up to be in charge and kind of the master of his own destiny in terms of being able to decide what projects should we undertake, how are we going to measure the success of these projects, and what he wasn't anymore sort of just at the mercy of an energy services company or somebody that was doing the measurement and the improvement and the verification for him. He was now able to, one, partner much more effectively with a service company or two, decide he would do this project himself and tackle it himself and then be able to verify the results. And that actually allowed him to grow immensely as a professional, allowed him to build a team where they're now doing a lot more of their own work at Weber State as an example. So I think it's really exciting to see how this insight can then be turned into action and move forward.
Right, absolutely, absolutely, and it's the results of those actions that really matter, and it's not something that you need to always measure yourself by having 100% success the first time out, right? Part of this process is going to be an iterative one, and we talked about that a bit before. It could be that you try a few things based on what you've seen that don't have huge impacts, and you might not want to do those again. It could be that that the data, the information, the insight that you've been able to gather is going to allow different people to decide that there's different actions that could be taken. So sometimes it's just getting the right set of smart people in front of the right set of information and insight, and you get the right people to look at how things are, trends are showing, and they can come up with different ideas about actions that can be taken. So individual insights can actually result in lots of different actions. And it really can be a very collaborative process, but it's important that we make sure that we're tracking the results as well, right, Ralf? I mean, you can't, once you've done the actions, once you've gotten all this information, this data that drives you into some insights, you really do need to be able to track how you did as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where it's just, again, really important. Like I said before, it's really important to start looking at the same picture, so then jointly you can look at what are you achieving and how much have you moved ahead. I think in terms of tracking results, it makes me think back to the comment you made earlier about the different types of data, right? Thinking about historic data, real-time data, and benchmarking data. And that plays a critical role here in tracking the results and comparing success, because success may be in beating or exceeding historical. It may be have more to do with benchmarking against similar facilities internally, or it may be benchmarking against externally. One of the things that I've observed here is sometimes it's really important to set up some formal standard operating procedures in terms of how buildings are operated, or some standard in terms of being able to have a common framework. Lawrence Berkeley Lab was one of the companies that we work with that did that very successfully. They had a number of buildings that they ended up, kind of one of the first things they did was, hey, we got to kind of benchmark across these buildings. So they took all the sort of different pieces, these different variables that they could control, and made sure that they did control those. So that allowed them to now take a look at some of the other data and start isolating, okay, where is the causality, and if we're making some improvements, we can see that the improvements were for a certain reason and were based on a certain activities. What then they were able to, those results then allowed them to really get a lot more credibility with the finance group, with executive management and other stakeholders, because they were able to report on those and give a very clear picture on what did we do, what results did we achieve. And I think another part here in the communicating results to stakeholders is to remember that the quote-unquote story to tell to the different stakeholders needs to be adapted, right? The message needs to be adapted to individuals. So whether you are providing feedback and results to a finance group is very different than reporting results to your operations or energy team versus, let's take a real end of the spectrum here, reporting to occupants, to students potentially on a campus, or the occupants of a building, and filling them in on results that are being achieved. It needs to be a very different language, different paradigm that needs to be used in communicating to those different stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that is often missed. You can go through all these steps and kind of stop at number 7 and have accomplished maybe some great things. And it's all well and good for you and your team to see what you've done for yourself, and maybe you've accomplished the goals you've set out to accomplish. But there really is a tremendous amount of benefit of sharing that information with other people. And as you said, sometimes those other people could be other colleagues in completely different departments of your organization, or sometimes with the occupants themselves. And you can really start to have the next set of goals be defined often by sharing the set of results that you've come up with from the project that you've just completed. So that really not only helps expand the value of what you've achieved, but it also kind of helps set the starting point or maybe what your next set of initiatives will be.
Great.
So I think we're kind of getting close to our Q&A time. I guess if we do a quick recap, we're at the finish line of these eight steps. Just to recap, we talked about setting of the goals. We talked about defining the insights that you'll need to achieve those goals and the data that will require, which leads you to doing an inventory of the data sources that you have available to give you those insights, and then spending time actually gathering that data, and the real important need of automating that system so that it's a constant source of refreshed information that doesn't require lots of people. And once you have that data, you can turn it into actionable insights, and those insights make you get off the couch and start taking real actions that you can then track and make sure that you've accomplished, or see how close you came to accomplishing the goals you set out with on the beginning of your journey, and then finally sharing that insight with all those that you've gathered that shows interest in the same set of information. So I think these 8 steps really do provide a great blueprint for helping people manage their buildings better and coming up with a system for doing that allows it to continue to improve, as opposed to just kind of accomplish a single end. And I think that's one of the greatest things about setting up a system like this, that gives you a framework, not just kind of a concrete result of a single project. But Ralf, I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share some of the airtime here to talk about these 8 steps, and I hope that it was insightful for people.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I think this it was a very good learning experience for me, for sure. Always a pleasure doing one of these with you. We had a couple of interesting questions come up, and we actually have like questions that are on the way opposite ends of the spectrum. One of the questions that we have is, what's sort of the latest paradigm shift that we've seen in building energy management, building energy efficiency? And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and then I'll share my perspective on it.
Latest paradigm shift. I think that what we've started to see is that people are recognizing that there's ways to do energy management more globally as opposed to locally. So the notion of having individual buildings or areas of buildings kind of do their own thing and figure out what they need to do specifically, leveraging that into something that can share across the globe is a shift that we've seen in the last year and a half or 2 years in particular. For instance, if you've got a lot of locations in a country that's a completely deregulated market, for instance, like the UK, and you can get your electricity from anybody that you want to choose, and most of the time you're doing that in a contract that you signed just for 1 year, and so you're always changing how it is that you're buying energy every year. That's a really, really helpful set of expertise to lend to your colleagues that have a lot of buildings in Texas or in California, where you've got a lot of deregulated activities. So there's a much more global nature of how energy management can be done. That's one of the shifts that I think we've noticed in the last year or two.
Well, Tim, I love it because my answer is going to complement yours very well, and I think actually shows how Urjanet and Lucid are sort of complementary in sort of how we tackle different parts of the supply chain, if you will. So the top paradigm I've seen is the shift from a focus on energy efficiency to occupant satisfaction. And I think what I've seen is obviously where there's still all that work around making sure that money is being spent as effectively as possible, but there with sort of the Internet of Things and meters and sub-meters and different devices being in different places, there's a lot more of bringing the different moving parts of a build and looking at some of this key data that can be obtained from a utility about the energy usage with occupancy information, with activity information, really thinking a lot more about the productivity aspect of the individuals and how a lot of these things can come together. So that's sort of a, I think there's different aspects to that. So I think with that, we've got about out of time, so we're going to kind of wrap it up here. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here, and it's always a delight doing these with you. If anybody has any questions, contact Tim or myself. You've got our websites right here. Tim, I'll sort of hand it to you for the last word.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ralf. It's always great to do work with you. You guys have so many customers in so many different walks of life. I love hearing how it is that people are innovating with your solution as they come up with different ways to do smart things once they got the data they need and visualize it in the way that they want. So it's an exciting space. I'm really happy to be in it with you guys, and can't wait to see what it is that the next 12 months will bring. Who has any idea what the next set of data is that people are going to be making use of to do smart things with their building? So thank you again for making us a part of this conversation, and I hope people found it useful.
All right, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ralf. We will send out the practical guide to transforming your data, which accompanies this webinar and goes into much more detail on each of the steps. So look forward to that. And again, thank you for joining us.